So wait, Tamnes. It is your host, McGee Gross, and I am streaming out of my hotel room in Orlando, Florida, where it's a balmy 50 degrees outside right now. I apologize for abandoning you for the warm, and more importantly, I apologize for abandoning you right when we were getting to a very important time period in Roman history, and that is Julius Caesar's civil war, what led up to that, and then how that goes into a civil war period that will eventually lead to the Principate and lead to the empire. So this kind of time period right now we're talking about, I call the fall and rise of Rome, because we've hit a time where the Roman state as currently established, as currently configured, is not working, right? We can all admit that we're having a series of civil wars over and over again, that we've introduced violence into our politics, that this republicanism isn't addressing the issues of now a burgeoning empire. And it's possible to be an empire without an emperor, but we're seeing from the Roman experience that it's not all that easy. Doing a little bit of background information here, big background, just kind of these time periods I like to talk about. The time period we're talking about right now is that end of the Roman Republic era, right? 509 is when they kick out the kings and they establish this republic. When do we say it ends? I mean, some people say 44, what we're going to run into. That's going to be the assassination of Julius Caesar. Some people are going to say 31. That's going to be when Caesar Augustus wins the Battle of Actium. Or 27, and that's going to be when Caesar Augustus is actually called Augustus, right? Where he's kind of solidified power all the way. For our sake, give me any date within that range, and we're going to be just fine. But just to kind of keep our eyes on this, the more important thing I want you to know is that we're moving from the Republican period into the Imperial period. And that's going to last in the western half of things all the way up until 476-ish, when Romulus Augustulus will be kicked off the throne by Odoacer, I believe, a Italian king. The Byzantine, the eastern part of the empire, as you'll see in this little demonstration over here, will continue on really all the way until 1453. So when you say, when does the Roman Empire fall? The first question you have to ask is, well, which one, right? But that's kind of briefly, we are right there going into right here. Okay. A couple things we talked about already in class on Monday, but I recognize a number of you were gone, is part of the reasons why we talk about this time period in the fall and we talk about Julius Caesar so much is he has this alliance, he has this relationship with Marcus Licinius Crassus and Gnaeus Pompey Magnus. Crassus, wildly rich, Pompey, esteemed general who conquered most of the East. Julius Caesar, he is really just a young scion of a once illustrious family, and he wants to become proconsul, right? He wants to ascend up the cursus honorum. He wants to ascend up the kind of traditional political structure in order to become a proconsul, to become a general, which we see he does when he goes to Gaul. We have this line from Caesar, Tris homines with regnum, coniuratio, amicitia. What do we call this? We call this triumvirate because these three men have some sort of relationship where they start working with each other and not against each other. It's not like a publicly announced thing. This is not a political position. This is just a relationship. So Cicero asks, is this a coniuratio? Is it a conspiracy? Kind of like the Catilinarian conspiracy we've learned about. Is it a amicitia? Is it like friendship? This is just a relationship. But they do start working together to get their own ends. We know that Crassus wants to become a general, right? Where Crassus wants to have that same celebrity that Pompey and later Caesar will have. He's well known, but he's not well liked within the city of Rome. Pompey wants to become an elder statesman. He also wants to settle his veterans, right? Part of being a general is actually finding a space for your veterans to go after the end of their campaigning, right? We take these veterans who've been serving under you and we put them in one spot. We make a colonia. We make this little colony and they build out a city from there. That's why when we go to visit places like Pompeii and Herculaneum, they'll always have those fora in the middle of the city, right? The Romans like to almost start with what would have looked like a Roman camp and build their way outwards with these major roads. In doing so, Caesar's made proconsul of Gaul for 10 years. That's one of the results of this. Caesar gets to settle veterans. He also marries Caesar's daughter, which is a little strange because Pompey's older than Caesar, but Caesar is his father-in-law. And Crassus gets what he wants. He gets to be a general, and he's sent out to Parthia, which I'm sure will have no problems whatsoever. So, when we start talking about why does this relationship break down? A couple of things is, number one, they started getting what they wanted, right? Caesar's pushing forth land reforms to actually help Roman citizens. He's kind of being cowed. He's being held back by his co-consul Bibulus. Remember, when Romans elected consul, they're one of two for the year. And so these two men have to work together or they're not going to work well at all. Eventually, it becomes so acrimonious that Caesar drives off Bibulus, and he spends the rest of his time cowering in his house, calling days nephos or bad days for doing business. And people jokingly refer to this as the year of Julius and Caesar instead of Caesar and Bibulus, because remember, our Romans date their years by who's consul that year, so they call it the year of Julius and Caesar because he's serving both ends. He does earn a proconsulship at first. Remember, our proconsulship is our governorship of a province. This is your opportunity to conquer. This is your opportunity to earn money and taxes, to win major victories, to bring back slaves, which again are all paying the debts that we built up over time while we were going through the Cursus Honorum. Originally, however, the Senate tried to stymie Caesar and give him a proconsulship over the woods and paths of Italy. Right, he kind of got like this Parks and Rec job out of this when he was supposed to be governor of an entire province, and he had that proconsulship changed. Even though the Senate's word on this was final, he found a way to work around it. Cato the Younger is going to become a figure here. We mentioned him before. He's going to be part of the resistance in the Civil War. And the Optimates, this is the political faction who believe that the power should reside in the best of the city, that they know what's best. Just trust them on this. Optimates will be one group. Populares will be another group. These are people who will seek political power from the people, not from the best people in society, but from the overall masses. Any efforts to compare this to modern day politics will always fail. I'll just put it that way. So keep that in mind. However, you should also be aware that unlike our current politics of Republicans and Democrats, it does seem factionally that people will move from populare to optimate, usually in that direction over time, pretty commonly. Now, this Amicitia, this triumvirate between Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey, they do renew this in 56 BC. So it's, kind of 5 years in, they're like, hey, this is working out, right? Maybe it's not perfect. Maybe we still really don't like each other, but let's keep working on this and not go at each other's throats. And in doing so, it extends Caesar's proconsulship in Gaul. Caesar's going to campaign in Gaul for about 10 years, but proconsulship usually lasts for 5 or less. So a lot of what he was doing, when the Senate says, like, hey, things that you were doing in Gaul were illegal, they kind of were, right? We're not it's not made out of whole cloth. And in 55, things go very poorly. Now, you'll see this little area east of Syria. You'll see a little Parthia up there. That is where Crassus, when he gets the right to build an army as part of this triumvirate, he will bring his army to Parthia. Now, Crassus has no military experience. Crassus, the only experience he has in life is being rich and paying people to do things for him. So they pay a guide to take them into Parthia. That entire area is going to be very deserty, lacking resources. It's not a place you're going to want to go to if you don't really know your terrain. Crassus pays a guide. They bring him into the desert. Surprise! The guide betrays them, and Crassus and his army are killed. While in the desert, they're surrounded and killed. The Parthians are known for their parting shot, or the Parthian shot, where they come up on cavalry, they might attack, and they turn back around really quick. But while they turn around, they're also shooting an arrow back at you. That parting shot is something you may have heard of before. So they're constantly bombarding the Roman infantry with this. Crassus himself is killed. He has molten gold poured down his throat, or so the story goes, finally fulfilling his desire for gold and a taste for gold he always had. And his head is used as a prop among the Parthian court. So not great, not a good result that we'd ask for. But the worst thing that comes out of this, and this is the most shameful part of this entire time period, is that The Roman standards, the eagle, right? The eagle that we even read in Julius Caesar's De Bello Gallico that we're willing to jump off the ship and rush into Britannia for, those eagles are taken. And this is a huge disgrace for our Romans, right? This is beyond anything we can imagine for, an American military comparison. But it's like having the American flag ripped off an embassy and they take it and they're taunting and they're waving it back at you, right? This is really, really bad stuff. This is a huge disgrace for the Romans. And on top of all of this, we mentioned the fact that Pompey was married to Julius Caesar's daughter, Julia. She dies in childbirth in 53. Pompey's extremely distraught. Caesar's very distraught. And they don't come together in this grief. You'll notice, and this is maybe a humanistic thing, people sometimes don't really come together in grief when they should. They're actually drawn farther apart than ever before, which is just all the worse. So we're missing one leg of the triumvirate. And if you don't think that's a problem, I ask you, go ahead and try to sit on a 2-leg stool. We're missing one leg of the triumvirate, and now we're having this tear between Caesar and Pompey. Now, how does this snap, right? In 52, there are a number of riots that lead to what we call an interrex or interregnum. We don't actually have a successful consulship. The riots breaking out result for the Senate to declare a Senatus Consultum Ultimum, or SCU, I'll call it sometimes, SCU. The Senatus Consultum Ultimum is almost like a dictatorship, but it's very, very limited. They put this the Senate puts this consultus ultimum down on Pompey. They say, you need to take care of this problem in the city. The riots have broken out. This is all the political back and forth that we've had going on ever since Marius and Sulla, ever since the social wars. They give Pompey authority to be elected sole consul. So he's not dictator, but he's sole consul. And he raises troops and he puts down some of these rebellions. Caesar, around this time period, wants to go back and stand for the consular elections. We mentioned before, the big tension here is Caesar needs to be present in Rome in order to run for consul. Okay, Caesar cannot be a general while in the city of Rome. Okay, Caesar would need to give up his army to come back to Rome to run for consul. Okay, but at the same time, with all this, Cato and the Senate have been trying to recall Caesar to prosecute him. And the only thing stopping them right now is that army, that huge army he's amassed while he was in Gaul. And then we start thinking, well, if you want to be consul, you can't go back to Rome to run for election. If you're a private citizen, you'll be arrested. This loggerheads that we hit right here is going to be the reason why the Civil War breaks out. And the fact that they can't settle, they do try. There's communication that goes back and forth between Pompey and Caesar. Remember, Pompey has this army putting down these revolts. Caesar has his army in Gaul. And there's kind of this conversation of maybe we both just lay down our arms right now. I mentioned before in class, if you're here on Monday, right, it's that episode of The Office where, Michael Scott's got the finger guns pointed at two people at the same time. It's a standoff here. But they can't defuse the situation. In January of 49 BC, it leads to its final head. Caesar decides to march on Rome. He's going to march on Rome with one singular legion. Remember, a legion is 6,000 soldiers. He has at least 10 at his disposal, but he picks one to move quickly. And in doing so, he is going to march on Rome, and he's going to come on down with his army and scare the crowd out of the Senate. They are going to immediately book it. They're going to immediately get out of there. They're going to immediately get out of Dodge. And so will Pompey, because they get bad reports that he's not bringing one legion. He's bringing the whole shebang. Here's a little depiction we have right here of Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. The Rubicon River is a famous river that divides Italy, ancient Italy, from Gaul in the Roman mindset. You can be on that far side of the river just fine. The moment you cross in, you need to be a private citizen. No general is allowed to be within the limits of Italy with their army. Now, the Civil War, in a lot of ways, will move quickly for our sake. He marches down with his 13th Legion. Pompey flees. They do continue conversations going back and forth. Remember, they all speak Latin. They're all trying to settle this. Caesar's going to capture towns along the way, and part of his plan is clemency. He offers mercy and clemency to anyone who resists him, who is willing to give up. This will not be the same thing that Pompey does. Pompey will actually have Roman citizens executed who side with Caesar. But Caesar will say, no, 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 it's okay, I forgive you. Now, remember, we talked about this before, the power behind forgiveness, right? If I forgive you for something, you did something wrong. But a lot of these people will start to feel in the debt of Caesar along the way. When he finally does get down to Rome, a lot of the Senate has left. Some of the Senate stayed. Some of the Senate sided with Caesar. Some of them were indifferent. They're like, I'm not leaving. He'll meet with them, but he'll also raid the treasury for some funds. This will be one mistake Caesar makes along his way right now, which will engender him very ill will going forward during this civil war. And the Romans, again, there's certain things you can do. This is one of those things I feel like you really, really shouldn't do. He's going to put Marcus Antonius, as kind of like the mayor of Rome while he's gone. The city itself. Mark Antony is a historically brutal and violent man, so you couldn't pick anyone else better for the job. He will follow the Senate in Pompey to Hispania. That's where they fled to originally. He's going to whoop their butts there, and then he's going to return to chase them down in Greece at this Battle of Pharsalus, right? This Battle of Pharsalus, very famously, Caesar is going to have a feint of his cavalry where they pretend to retreat, then they come back and they flank them. I'm not so great with military history. All I can know is pretty darn famous, so you can look it up and learn more about it. But it's a time, one of many times, where Caesar was outgunned and outmanned, but he was able to win the battle due to his strategy. He'll return to Rome and declare himself dictator. Dictator, remember, is a legal position that we have in the city, in the Constitution of Rome, where you are in complete control for 6 months to solve problems. He'll have himself declared by the Senate. Isn't that so nice that the Senate decided to do that? And then he'll also be elected consul 11 days later. So they're starting to line up the political justification for the power he truly has, right? We're talking about de jure versus de facto. De jure is going to be by law or of law. Now, Caesar really doesn't have that authority right now. But de facto, does he have that authority? You better believe it. When you bring a legion, and the rest of them are coming closely behind, when you bring those legions down into Rome, you are the leader of Rome, de facto, but not de jure until we start adding on this dictatorship, we start adding on this consulship. Caesar will continue to pursue Pompey after that Battle of Pharsalus in 48. Along the way, I think we maybe get to this next slide. He's going to be declared dictator again for a full year. Now that's different than we said before, 6-month term. Now Caesar's going to be a dictator for a full year. In Pompey's flight, he's going to run to Egypt, where the Egyptians are going to probably say, we don't want to be in the middle of this, and decide to kill him. Womp womp. They'll behead him on the shores of Alexandria in front of his wife and kids. So not great. And this is a good reminder. This is our second triumvir who has met a grisly end. If you want a retirement plan, if you want to kind of wrap things up, sitting on the beach somewhere, triumvir is not the career you want. Caesar's going to pursue, and he's also going to get in the middle of a civil war among the Egyptians. There's Ptolemy and there's Cleopatra, his sister and wife, but we're not going to talk about that. Cleopatra the Seventh, and this is the Cleopatra we think about when we talk about Cleopatra. This line of Ptolemies is coming all the way down from the general who served under Alexander the Great, and you're like, Alexander the Great? I'm like, yeah, that Alexander the Great, way back in like 500. For the Greeks, after he dies, his empire is broken up among his generals. The Ptolemies are actually Greek rulers who take over Egypt and have for this whole time. He is going to settle that civil war between them, and he's also going to kind of settle up a new relationship with Cleopatra and have his only biological son, Caesarion. So keep that name in mind. He'll come up later. He's going to do a whole loop around the Mediterranean in this process. He's going to, there's a rebelling king in Pontus, Pharnaces II, and he's going to beat him very, very quickly. This when he famously says, "Wani witty wichi." Came, I saw it, conquered, right? That's all he has to say about this, because, look, I fought so many wars. Do you want me to give you details about this one? I don't even remember it. I won it so quickly. He does return to Rome. He pardons Cicero. Remember Cicero a little bit, learning about him earlier. He's kind of this Roman statesman who kind of going back and forth. Do I side with the Senate? Do I side with Caesar? He settles some mutinies. There's some people who are like, whoa, I've been fighting wars and now civil wars for 15 years. He settles those and he settles those legions. He goes back down to northern Africa where Cato the Younger, right, one of the instigators, one of these very stalwart resistors, is still resisting. And he will end up beating Cato's army at the Battle of Utica. Cato himself will make the decision to kill himself rather than receive Caesar's clemency. This is very important, that we have these historical examples of people who refuse to kowtow themselves to Caesar. And he's going to go back to Spain, because remember, Spain was where that civil war started off, where the Senate went to. He has to wrap them up. And he also has a pirate problem in the island of Sardinia with Sextus Pompey, Pompey Magnus's son. So yeah, a lot going on. But in that time period too, he's going to return to Rome itself, and he's going to start reigning and making some really big changes. One of the big things he'll do is increase the size of the Senate to 900. And remember all of his time in Gaul. He's going to start bringing down some leading Gallic figures to be in the Senate. The Italian senators are aghast by this, right? You have these people with long beards, just like me, coming down in togas pretending to be senators. They can't even speak Latin. But this is a way for Caesar to, number one, try to increase the franchise a little bit, where more people buy into the, the Republic, Empire, whatever you want to call it at this stage. But also consolidate his power with people who agree with him. Remember, when he was up in Gaul, he was settling a lot of debts between people. He was actually trying to get them all on one page. And anytime there was a dispute, whoever went to Caesar that he was willing to lie with, he was going to be fiercely loyal to that individual until they end up betraying him. He's going to settle his soldiers. He's going to give Latin rights. This is not full Roman rights, but it's not no rights. It's right in between Latin rights. He also reconciles with Mark Antony, Marcus Antonius. He wasn't a huge fan of how Mark Antony behaved in Rome. It wasn't very helpful for his political cause while he was the mayor, but they settle up. And Mark Antony will stay a loyal lieutenant for the rest of Caesar's life, which is getting shorter and shorter. We mentioned before, we reformed the calendar. We moved from a 10-month calendar all the way to a 12-month calendar with 365 days and a leap year every 4. Very, 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 very similar to ours. He enacts a census to get a count of the number of people and kind of adjust the taxation. And he's going to lower the grain dole, right? There's going to be a cost for grain at this time, and Caesar himself is going to actually make it pretty much free for Roman citizens to buy grain. And he's also going to build the Forum of Caesar, which many of us saw on the Italy Trip 2025, hashtag Italy Trip 2025. In this process, he's going to name his great nephew, Gaius Octavius, his heir. Heir not in terms of political, but in terms of just when he dies, where does his stuff go, right? Who gets his collection of stamps? It's going to be Gaius Octavius, and it's going to be important later on. In 44, we take that now 5-year dictator term and turn it into dictator perpetuo. And he is going to, in doing so, he's just saying, look, I'm not playing this game anymore. Last time he was in Rome, back in 59 or 68 BC, he was a politician. He's not a politician anymore. He's a general, and generals aren't used to sharing authority. He's starting to consolidate all this power into one spot. And all these positions he's giving himself, he's making what will become the Roman imperatorship, the Roman principate. Julius Caesar himself will never be called an emperor. We don't ever consider him an emperor. But he essentially makes the position along the way. He sets up the seat for the next person to sit in. And he starts planning this invasion of Parthia. And you're like, Parthia? And I'm like, yeah, Parthia. Remember, where Crassus went, where he lost the standards, where the Romans were humiliated. In the summer of 44, he's going to go there and he's going to whoop their butts. And he's going to get those standards back. So that's why this burgeoning conspiracy in the background needs to move up their plot to assassinate Julius Caesar. And we get to this time period and to this date that we call the Ides of March, that we maybe historically know a little bit about. So this gets us all caught up. If you missed out on Monday, everything we talked about so far. Now, go back to those riots we had in Rome earlier when the Roman Senate had to call Senatus Consultum Ultimum. During that time period, the original Roman Senate House actually had a fire. There was a fire started by this guy named Clodius Pulcher and his rioters. So because of that, they're holding the Senate in the theater built by Pompey. We call it the Theater of Pompey. So, that's kind of a little bit creepy. That's Caesar's mortal enemy, and that's where they're going to have this plot take place. The night before the Ides of March, and this is one interesting thing I learned about the Ides of March. For the Romans, the Ides of March, March 15th-ish, is going to be a date when they settle debts, right? This is when, like, hey, end of the year stuff, almost like our tax day, right? In April 15th or whatever it is. It's like, this is when you need to be settled up. It's like, settling debts. The night before the Ides of March, his wife has very bad dreams. I think it's Calpurnia at this time. I can't keep track of all of Caesar's wives, and hardly could he. She has bad dreams. She has a dream of Caesar flying in the air with Jupiter, right? And Caesar takes this as kind of a good omen. And yeah, I mean, if you want to be flying in heaven with the king of the gods, okay, keep going through your day. On the way, he's warned by a soothsayer. Soothsayer is someone who actually predicts the future. And he is told, beware the Ides of March, right? We very famously. Also, along the way, he's literally given a note from somebody who is telling him, like, Caesar, you got to read this. There's something really, 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 really bad about to happen. And Caesar says, thank you so much for your concern. I will read this in due time and respond within 24 hours, puts it in his pocket. He'll never read that again. Now, as they're going in, they distract Mark Antony. Remember, we mentioned Marcus Antonius is his loyal lieutenant. And they distract Mark Antony. They pull him off. They're like, hey, look at this cool pigeon we saw, right? And they don't kill him at this time, which might be a mistake, but this is part of the decision of the liberatores, these ones who have been conspiring for this. And then Julius Caesar is sitting, I can't rush this, even though I need to get going here in a few minutes. Julius Caesar is sitting, someone comes up and puts a hand on him, and he goes, whoa, what? This is violence. And the guy takes a dagger out and stabs him. They believe I think the first one's hitting somewhere in the neck. This first one might have been what was going to be fatal. And that individual who stabs him first yells out, like, what are we waiting for? Let's do this thing, right? And they all jump in. Like we see, if I'm able to go back here, he starts being attacked from all sides. Now, famously from Julius Caesar, you might know that it's reported that Caesar yells et tu Brute when he sees Brutus, and he's surprised by one of the people he offered clemency to, one of the people who was kind of like, I mean, he was a mentor to, and this was his mentee. So imagine, if any of you senior peer mentors are stabbed by the freshman, you'd be probably pretty upset too. He says et tu Brute and Julius Caesar, but we don't believe that's the case. The two accounts we have are either that he says nothing, right? He just kind of groans out as he's being stabbed at the foot, as he's crawling over, he's crawling, trying to cover himself at the foot of a statue of Gnaeus Pompey, his mortal enemy. Ooh, creepy. There's also this report, I believe it's in Suetonius, where Julius says, instead seeing Brutus, he says, kai su teknon, and you're like, oh, I don't know Greek. And I was like, oh yeah. In Greek, that means, and you, my child, because there was this rumor that Julius Caesar had a relationship with Brutus's mom, and this is when he finds out it's his real father. Ooh, bad moment to be stabbing that guy. Okay, afterwards, the liberators think they're going to go out and receive a hero's welcome when they, after they do the deed, but instead, they go out, and the people are pretty confused, pretty upset about this, but most people kind of just flee because they're like, something bad's going to come out of this. And afterwards, Julius Caesar's body is cremated in the Forum. We actually got a chance to visit a place where it's cremated in Italy 2025, hashtag Italy 2025, and a speech was given by Marcus Antonius. And this really changes the way that the Romans perceive this event. It really shapes this understanding. We talk about that speech later on as well. And at this point, we have a question of what's going to happen with the Republic. What is going to happen to Rome? We have these different factions right now. We have the Senate and Marcus Tullius Cicero. Remember, he survives. He is forgiven by Caesar, but he's still kind of a loyal Republican and that small r like idea of the Republic individual. You have the Liberatores, Marcus Junius Brutus and Cassius, who took the law into their own hands and killed Caesar, but for the good of the Republic. You have Caesar's lieutenant, Marcus Antonius, his adopted son, Octavius, and his true biological son, Caesarion. And we'll start thinking, who's going to be able to take that power? Remember that seat Caesar was making all along? Who's going to be able to take that seat and finally sit down in? Or are we going to have a return to the Republican values that we talked about earlier? So that's where we'll leave it off and get you set up for your next activity. I need to get out the door here in a minute, but I hope you guys have a great day. I hope this explained a little bit more of this time period, and I look forward to seeing more about this with you soon. Wale.